So I'm making pizza, and in part one I talked about the equipment and tools I use and how I prepare my oven. In this part two, I'm going to show you the pizza dough that I like to make. Following that, in part three, I'm going to show you how I set up my pizza station, including all the ingredients and toppings that are popular with my family and friends. And then finally in part four, once I have everything set up, I'm going to make pizzas. So let me show you the dough that I like to make. There are so many variations of pizza dough, but the basic ingredients are all the same. It's flour, water, salt, and yeast. But then there's the different kinds of flour, the different ratios, and do you add other ingredients like olive oil or sugar or honey or things like wheat germ? I've tried out many of these recipes, and this is the one that works for me. It's more in the style of a Neapolitan pizza dough, and that uses those basic ingredients. I don't fire up my oven to make 1 or 2 pizzas. So I'm going to make enough dough for 10 pizzas, each dough ball around 250 grams. If you want to follow this recipe but don't want to make quite that much, then 10 is an easy number to divide, or you can just simply follow the baker's percentages. I weigh all the ingredients in grams, including the water. Measuring by volume, like cups, is not very accurate and can lead to an inconsistent dough each time you make it. So first I've got my flour, and I like to use a combination of 50% all-purpose and 50% double O. I've really come to like how the dough stretches while I'm shaping it, and then also the final flavor and texture of the crust. So that's 735 grams of each flour for a total of 1,470 grams. In baker's percentages, your flour is always 100% in proportion to your other ingredients. Then I've got 1,000 grams of water, that's 68%, and that's also your hydration ratio. 30 grams of fine sea salt. And then I want to show you 3 different yeasts, either one of which can be used for this recipe. I've got 15 grams of fresh yeast, 7.5 grams of active dry yeast, and 6 grams of instant yeast. Fresh yeast is really great and will add a lovely flavor to your dough, but it's not always that easy to find. It usually comes in 1-pound blocks and is highly perishable, so you have to use it all within a short period of time. Active dry yeast is very easy to find at your local supermarket. It usually needs to be dissolved in water first and really doesn't have quite the flavor of fresh yeast. The yeast I use the most is instant yeast. I can mix it in with all my dry ingredients without dissolving in water first, and I think it has a better flavor than active dry yeast and much closer to fresh yeast. So I'm going to start by adding both the flours and the salt and the yeast. Then I'm going to mix those together. Then I'm going to make a well in the middle and then add all the water. Then using my dough scraper, I'm going to mix everything together to combine until there's no dry ingredients left. I'm going to turn my dough out onto my work surface and then knead it for maybe 5 to 8 minutes. All the flour I need is already in the dough, so I'm not going to add any more to my work surface. Kneading the dough helps to develop the gluten strands, giving it strength and the ability to stretch, which is important when it comes to shaping your pizzas. If you're planning on making your dough and your pizzas the same day, let's say you're making pizzas at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then you should make your dough very early in the morning, at least by 8 a.m., and then leave it in the bowl to rest for about 4 hours. Then you need to divide and ball it up and then put it in your proofing tray for another 3 to 4 hours, and then they'll be ready to shape. I prefer to make my dough the day before and let it rest overnight in the refrigerator, where I think it develops a lot more flavor. Here is the dough that I made last night, and I can see that it's developed well and the gluten has strengthened and it's much more elastic. So I'm going to lightly dust my work surface and my proofing tray. Then I'm going to take the dough out of the container and then start dividing it up. The way I like to ball up the dough is to lightly dust my hands with flour, fold the dough in on itself a few times, then push the ball up and then pinch the bottom closed. And then place them in my floured proofing tray. Put the lid on and let them rest for another 3 to 4 hours. And then after that, they're going to be ready to shape into pizzas. So that's the pizza dough that I like to make, and it's tucked up snugly in the proofing tray. And while it's resting, next in part 3, I'm going to show you how I set up my pizza station, including all the ingredients and toppings that are popular with my family and friends. You want to hear about my snuggly dough?
I do. I thought I was your snuggly dough.
You are my little snuggly dough. Can't use that. Right. Yeah, you are my first snuggly dough.